Hey guys, hope you guys did great on the quiz. Miss Smith, please give Miss Chasen the quizzes to grade and she will get them back to you guys as soon as possible. Now we're going to go on to our notes. For our topic today, it's super easy. It's just on congruent parts of congruent triangles. So if you will, get your notebooks out. Here I just wanted to show you that your practice quiz should be glued down on page 102. And then once you get your quiz returned to you, that's going to go on page 103. So I'm going to open up now to my notes, which I'm going to be writing on page 104. Okay, so I'm on page 104, and what we're writing today is CPCTC. Okay, what this stands for is corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And you see that we get the CPCTC from this long sentence here. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a basic triangle. Let's call this A, B, C. First thing I want to do before we go into the corresponding parts is I just want to make sure that we know how to name a triangle. So let's first start there. How to name a triangle. So to name a triangle, what you need is all three angles. And you name by going around the shape. This is mostly important, name going around the shape when you have a quadrilateral. So you would name this by going A, B, C, D. You would never go A, C, B, D. You would need to go all the way around the shape. So if we go back up to this triangle that we mentioned up here, we would just call this triangle, and you use the triangle symbol, A, B, C. Now, since we could start anywhere on any one of the vertices of the triangle, we could also call this triangle A, C, B, or I could start from a different one and say triangle CBA. Now there are several other names that you could name this triangle, but those are just three examples of how you could name this triangle. Next, how to name a segment or a side. How to name a segment or a side. So we're going to be referring back to the same picture that we drew up here. Triangles have three sides, so what I'm talking about is how do you name this side? Well, what you need is two endpoints. And since we need two endpoints, we can name this segment AB on the bottom. Segment AB. If I wanted to name this side here, I would call that segment BC. And then this last side over here on the left, if I wanted to name that, we would name that segment AC. Now, since a segment has two endpoints, we can also name this going each segment in the opposite direction. So instead of AB, the same segment could be referred to as BA. So for BC, what would be another name for naming BC? CB. Good job. And then last, if I wanted to rename AC in another way, how could we name that? CA. Okay. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to name an angle. And this is probably the most difficult because there are several different ways that you can name an angle. So if I look back up at the triangle that I was referring to, that A. I'm going to start with angle A. I could just call angle A, angle A. But if I wanted to also refer to angle A, I could also use 3 letters to name angle A. And what you have to pay close attention to is if I'm referring to angle A needs to be in the center of the 3 letters. So I could call this angle CAB, where A is in the center, or I could go the other direction and say angle BAC, where still A is in the center. So let me write that down. So this could be angle CAB, or it could be angle BAC. And then you'll notice, oh sorry, can't see, and then you'll notice here that angle A is in the center. Whatever angle it is that you're referring to, if you're using 3 letters, it needs to be located in the middle. Okay, so if we wanted to name angle B in another way, one way would be to name CBA, or in the opposite direction it could be ABC. Okay, so let's try angle C. Angle C, okay, you try the 2 other ways. So hopefully you got angle BCA or angle ACB. Again, you notice that the C is in the center, over here the B is in the center or in the middle. Okay, I'm going to turn pages now to page 105 because I don't have much room left on this page. So I'm going to turn here to page 105 and we're going to continue our notes on page 105. So on 105, now what we're going to talk about is congruent parts. So I just want to remind you that the symbol for the word congruent is just the equal sign with a squiggly on top. So that's the congruent symbol. What we're going to talk about is what marks are used on triangles to indicate congruent parts. So first we're going to start with what we call tick marks or hash marks. Tick marks or hash marks show 2 sides or segments are congruent. So if I draw a quick little picture, make sure that when you draw your triangles that you're labeling, it's very, very important to label the same as what I am labeling. So I have triangle ABC and triangle DEF. So I'm going to use tick marks to show that 2 sides are congruent. I'm going to first start by putting 1 tick mark on AB and 1 tick mark on DE. So what those tick marks mean is I can say then that AB, segment AB, and whenever you write the word segment AB, you have to put the segment bar over top of it. So segment AB is congruent to segment DE. And notice that I went in the same order when I used the letters. So A to B. So even this triangle here is in a different orientation, so we need to go in the same direction, D to E. Okay? And let's try another one. Let's say I put 2 tick marks here on BC. That would also go over here on this side. So if I wanted to say that these 2 parts were congruent, I would say segment BC is congruent to segment. Now, it's very important that B kind of looks like a right angle, that E is the one that's similar to that. It's the one that looks like a right angle, so we would start at E, then F. So BC is congruent to segment EF. That's all that tick marks indicate. Okay, next we're going to talk about arc marks. And arc marks are just going to refer to showing that angles are congruent. So it shows 2 angles are congruent. Again, we're going to draw a little picture. So let's call this JKL. And I'm going to draw another one. I'm going to call this MNO. Okay, 2 triangles. Make sure your letters are matching up to my letters. Now let's say I put an arc mark here on L, and I put the same arc mark here on O. What we can say then is angle L is congruent to angle O. So we write that saying angle L is congruent to angle O. Now let's say I had another arc mark, but this time I used 2 arc marks to show that this is a different angle. And we can say that angle J is congruent to angle M. That's all arc marks shows, that the 2 things are congruent. Okay, next we're going to go to a keyword that you need to know, vertical angles. Vertical angles. Vertical angles are pairs of opposite angles. Pairs of opposite angles made by 2 intersecting lines. These are always congruent. These are always congruent. So, for example, if I have 2 lines like this that are intersecting, these are 2 lines, so I should put arrows on them, then what that means is that this angle is congruent to this angle. They're opposite angles. They're on opposite sides of the lines. And then I could also say that this angle here is congruent to this one here. They're on opposite sides of each other. The way that we're going to use this for this unit is we might have 2 triangles that are connected like this so that they make a bow tie looking thing. And my picture does not look great, but let's assume that they are congruent, where this angle and this angle in these 2 triangles would be congruent angles. So if what I'm saying is if this value here was 40 degrees, then this angle at this here would also be 40 degrees. Okay? Reflexive sides. And this one is probably the hardest to see. Reflexive sides. So in adjoining triangles, it is the shared, or sometimes we can think of it as the overlapping or touching side. And these are congruent. So that probably sounds funny, that sentence, but what you need to think is in 2 triangles that are touching, it's the shared or overlapping sides that are congruent. So I'm going to draw you a picture. Let's say I have a triangle like this. This is, oh, I can't see, I'm sorry. You have a triangle like this, and then I draw another triangle that's attached to it. So what I want you to think about is, think about these 2 triangles. If I were to separate them, like this was what they would look like. What we're really saying is that this shared side here, in between them, this side and this side, the shared side in between them, is congruent to itself. So if we were to separate them, this side is congruent to this side here. So even though when they're touching like that, even though you don't think of them as 2 separate sides, they are 2 separate sides in 2 different triangles. So we think of those as congruent. So if it was a 5 here, this would also be a 5 here. Okay? And then the last thing we're going to talk about is a congruency statement. So let's say, for example, I'll give you triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF what I know about this is that angle A is congruent to angle D, or angle B is congruent to angle E, and lastly we can say that angle C is congruent to angle F. This is how I like to think of it. I like to match up the letters. Miss Chasen also matches up the letters, but she says it a little bit differently than I do, so I'm going to share that with you too. So Miss Chasen says, write the two triangle congruency statements on top of each other. So if I have triangle ABC, we also have triangle DEF, and it's very easy to see this way, the same relationship that I was making with the arrows. A and D are congruent. B and E are congruent. And C and F are congruent. So if you line them up like that, then you can see that the angles are congruent. So let's draw a picture and see what that looks like. If I have a triangle, and this is going to be A, B, C, and then some other triangle. This is D, E, F. What kind of angle marks, arc marks, do I need to make to show that these are congruent? So first, we want to say that angle A was congruent to angle D. So angle A and D are congruent. Then angle B, so I'm going to put a double arc mark. B is congruent to E. And then last, we have C, triple, and F will go together. Now not only do we say that the angles are congruent, but since the two triangles are congruent, we can also say the side lengths are congruent. So I would say AB is congruent to DE because it's in between the 1 and the 2. It's in between the 1 and the 2 mark. BC is in between the 2 and the 3. 2 and the 3. And then the 1 and the 3 here. So we can say that these two triangles are congruent. All of their parts are congruent. Okay guys, in a moment, sorry, here are your notes again that we were just on. In a moment, please pause the video and pass out the worksheet that we're going to be using for the notes. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and get the notes pulled up, and Ms. Smith, you can pause the video and pass out the worksheets real quick. And then we'll come back and I'm going to show you one example of each section. Okay, at this point you guys should have the worksheet. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over one problem from each section of the worksheet to make sure that you guys understand how to do it. So on the first one, it just says complete each congruent statement by naming the corresponding angle or side. So there's several different ways that you can do this. I'm going to talk about them. It says segment FD is congruent to what? So one way of doing this is just to look at, it says FD. So if we think about the letters and what they correspond to, FD is going to correspond to IK. So let me show you this way. F is going to correspond to I, and D is going to correspond to K. So when we write that statement, it's just going to be segment IK. Another way that we could look at this is we could look on the picture and see segment FD has 3 marks. What has 3 marks over here? IK, but you need to make sure that you get them in the correct order. So F has the 3 arc marks, I has the 3 arc marks. And then D has the 1 arc mark, so K has the 1 arc mark. So that's how you would match them up. Okay, if you'll look on your paper now to question number 7. Number 7 just says write a statement that indicates the triangles in each pair are congruent. So to do this, what we're going to do is I always like to start with the arc marks. And I would start here at arc 1, and then arc mark 2, and then 3. So I would write it in that order. So triangle J, K, I is congruent to 2, and we need to be sure to do it in the same order, 1, 2, 3. So 1 is triangle T, 2 is R, and S is 3. That's all you have to do for this one. Okay, next we have mark the angles and sides of each pair to indicate that they are congruent. So B is congruent to M, D is congruent to L, and C is congruent to K. Then we need to put our tick marks. So I usually start from 1 to 2, gets a 1 mark. 1 to 2 gets a 1 tick mark. 2 to 3 is going to get 2 tick marks. 2 to 3 is going to get 2 tick marks. And then 1 to 3 is all that's left, so 1 to 3 gets 3 tick marks. That's all you have to do to complete this worksheet. You guys need to finish up this worksheet in class, and then you will not have any homework, and you guys have a wonderful weekend, and I will be talking to you guys again on Monday. Have a great weekend.